You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
And I'm Joanie Harwell.
We are continuing our KFUO history and a history series as we look forward to celebrating 100 years of God's blessings, proclaiming the good news here on KFUO. Another special guest today in just a moment. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting the Coffee Hour. You can find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Joining us today, the Reverend Jolly John Lukomski, host of Wrestling with the Basics. Pastor Lukomski, welcome back to the Coffee Hour.
It is good to be here. And as you address me as Jolly John, that actually was a title or whatever you would, that came to me from you, from KFUO. No one ever called me Jolly John before I started working there at the radio station. And that's when I picked up that, well, what is that, a title? I don't know what that is.
Well, yeah, every time we heard you, you had laughter in your voice.
I just assumed that was your wrestler name.
No,
Well, that's it. I did not start professional wrestling either until I started working at the radio station. Never dawned on me that I would be wrestling. But yeah, now we do it every Saturday.
And the name, see?
And it's, I guess.
Really invokes fear in his opponent,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Jolly John Lukomski.
Why is he so happy? Oh, no.
Pastor Lukomski, when did you first begin serving with KFUO?
Yeah, you sent me the email and you said, well, I have no idea. Joanie, how long have you been there at the radio station?
I started in 80, I think it was 89 that I started.
Okay, so was I there when you started or were you there before me? Do you remember? We're old people. Come on.
What was the first show you were on, the Bible study?
Actually, Joanie, years ago, and this is how I got started. I'm assuming it was a letter because at that time there was no email, there were no text messages. So I don't know how the radio station communicated to area pastors. So I think I got a letter saying, hey, we're doing these noon devotions. And they're like 5-10 minutes. It wasn't very long. And if you're interested in participating, let us know. And I remember driving over to the station there when I was on the campus at Concordia Seminary and that beloved old building there. And I came over and you put me in a studio somewhere, Andy, and it was just me and a microphone. That's all there was. And I think we did like 20 of these 10-minute devotions. Yeah. And then they would air every day at noon. And that's where it all got started. But I honestly don't. It has to be at least 35 years ago. I've been in the ministry for 40, retired for 3, and it was pretty much when I had started the ministry and I know you didn't give it to me. It wasn't like people said, oh, there's that young guy. He's so good over in New Athens. It was just a mass mailing, and I was foolish enough to say, oh, yeah, I'd love to give that a try. So.
And it was a good thing that you did. You've been a blessing to KFUO and to our listeners ever since.
Well, KFUO has been a blessing to me. In fact, KFUO gets me up in the morning, and that, I'm retired. Occasionally people will say, hey, can you come and preach for us? But man, we've been doing this stuff on KFUO for all those years, and it's such a blessing for me to continue to do both Thy Strong Word, although it was originally the Bible study. Do you remember the Bible study?
Yes.
And it was at 10 o'clock instead of 11. And well, of course, we've had a whole bunch of different hosts on Thy Strong Word, too. But then, anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So tell me what else you want to know. So it's got to be at least 35, 40 years that I've been around there.
That's because I was saying 89, but I think I started in 87. And I think the program you're talking about really had started already because I remember when I was even growing up, they used to have pastors come and do those devotionals. And then eventually, with you and me there, we started changing things.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Joanie, right, to get them straightened up right away.
So what happened after that? Where did things go for you? So after you started at some point in the relatively near past, and then...
So here's what happened, Sarah. So apparently people weren't paying attention. Because if they'd listened to those devotions, they would have said, we really need to be more restrictive in terms of where we send these letters out, see? But apparently, the people were probably listening to it, but the staff, no, we don't have time to listen to devotions every day. We've got busy radio stuff to do. But anyway, then they started this daily weekday Bible study, which is now morphed into Thy Strong Word, which is probably one of the really great things that you guys do there on KFUO. And so they said, well, we'd like you to come and do this for us. And of course, it's hard to get people to make that kind of commitment. Although, we make the big bucks. I don't know why people wouldn't just. By the way, when do I get paid? Because that was what I was told. I said,
in heaven.
Maybe next year, John. Well, Jolly, we'll give you. So anyway, so that's how it started. We started doing this daily Bible study at 10. And I was blessed enough to do it a couple of times a month, maybe once a month, just depended on how many pastors were available. And then you all remember Chuck Rathard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he was station manager at that time. And he wasn't the original host of the Bible study, but at some point he undertook that assignment as well and did a great job because here you have this lay person who's just really, really sharp, knows his Bible well. And so he would raise questions and bring up things that maybe as a pastor, I just assumed everybody knew. But then he said, John, we've got this space on Saturday morning too, which at the time I thought was impressive. And then I realized, well, yeah, there was a space on Saturday morning because nobody wants a Saturday morning. Maybe that's why I got it too, because I think they thought, well, this will be great for the kids. Kid Jolly John would be kind of like watching cartoons, So yeah, that's how the whole wrestling with the basics, for those of you who don't understand the reference anyway, before Saturday mornings, we have a show called Wrestling with the Basics. And so that's how that all came to be. And that's been going on, I guess, probably for 30 years too, I assume. So
I don't think sometimes people realize that when you're on the radio, at least our listeners, maybe they don't. It's really part of your ministry. The whole time you are on there. And I know people with the Bible study and then with Wrestling with the Basics, people were hungry to hear these messages, to hear the pastors discuss the Bible, because there were, like you said, the questions Chuck would ask and questions our callers would ask. They needed answers to those questions.
Yeah, and that's what was exciting, because here's the problem. When I preach on a Sunday morning, I see people and I can look at their faces and sometimes their eyes kind of glaze over and I know, oh, well, okay, apparently that point didn't come across the way I thought. But what made that exciting was just what you said, Joni, that people would call in. And then eventually, of course, they would be able to mail in, text in questions. But yeah, then you knew people were listening, and then you knew people had things that they were concerned about. And it was nice to know that people were appreciating what was being said. The thing that really has changed, and again, whether it's happened so quickly and yet it's at the same time so subtly that maybe we don't realize it. When I started, guys, the only people that were listening to us were the people who lived in the St. Louis area, and occasionally a farmer who was working out in his fields somewhere up around Springfield, Illinois. I don't know who the guy was, but you were talking about, he would call in. He would call in frequently.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And he was sitting on his tractor.
Yes.
Because they had really good radios and tractors, apparently. And do you realize now that what we're doing this very moment, and if this isn't a mark of the end of the world, I don't know what is. All over the world, they can literally hear and listen to what we're saying at this moment. And that's great, isn't it?
Yes.
Because wasn't that the commandment that we should preach the gospel to all nations? And, we heard that years ago. We thought, well, yeah, we're
how will that ever happen?
Yeah, that's right. We're doing it here in St. Louis. And then it was like God says, oh, you have no idea what I've got planned. I'm going to give you the ability to literally do that, to send it out to all nations.
Let's go back to Wrestling with the Basics and the genesis of that, the formation of that. Where did you get the idea for that, and who did you team up with to start Wrestling with the Basics?
All right. I'm glad you asked that, Eddie, because if we're doing the history, is that what I understand we're doing here is the history?
Yes.
Okay. Is this the 100th anniversary?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it
Thanks be to
Yes.
God. Yes.
Yeah. So you all remember a guy by the name of Paul Clayton. He was this guy that just was filled with energy. I don't know how else you could say it.
Oh,
He had the stuff he was supposed to do. He was the morning show host, and he did this morning. And, you know, he could have just walked through it. He could have played some religious music, and that would have been the end of it. But no, he was constantly looking for people to interview. Mary Mont Simon, I remember, was one of his regular guests. Somehow I got incorporated as one of his regular guests. And in fact, oh man, that was so much fun because I wouldn't be Jolly John, but I might be Simon Peter. And I'd have like an Irish accent because, you know, that's how they talk in Galilee. That's a Galilean accent. And we'd have Amos the shepherd. And well, anyway, so Chuck put Paul in charge of this because Paul was always wanted to do something new, something different. In fact, I think we probably should give some credit to Paul to the fact that we are podcasting now. See, everybody knows about podcasting now, right? There's all kinds of 100 different podcasting apps out there. Even football players now are podcasting and making a lot of money doing it too. We got to figure that out. How are those guys making all that money? And we've been doing it a long time. But so he was the one that said, hey, this is where it's going to go. Podcasting. And so, yeah, so we started doing this show. And it was his idea right away that, well, let's not just do it on Saturday morning because there's only going to be a handful of people that will listen on Saturday morning. Well, let's do this in a way that people can pick it up and listen to it later. And from that then came the show that we know as Wrestling with the Basics. And Paul, of course, finally retired. And then this really nice young guy who just happened by coincidence to have been my vicar, the only vicar I ever had.
That's how that happened.
Yeah. And of course, that
we
was
were
it. They said,
wondering.
no more vicars for him. Boy, that was a mistake. Well, it's done now. And then so Matt and I have teamed up and we've been doing it. What do you think? At least for 10, 15, maybe longer than that? So that's the genesis of the whole, and yes, the title, Wrestling with the Basics, that came from Paul. He was the one that came up with that idea. Yeah. And I said, Paul, that's fine, but I'm not going to cover myself in oil. If that's what you thought, we were going to do the show in shorts covered with oil. No.
So
but the title's okay.
You weren't a professional wrestler when you started the program. Thanks for clearing that up.
Wait, you thought
more facts in just a moment as we celebrate 100 years and looking forward to our 100th anniversary celebration here on KFUO. Talking with Pastor Jolly John Lukomski on the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
And I'm Joanie Harwell.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason, to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
And I'm Joanie Harwell.
We are looking forward to celebrating 100 years of God's blessings, proclaiming the good news of Christ for you here on KFUO. And today we are talking with the Reverend Jolly John Lukomski. He's a host of Wrestling with the Basics here on KFUO. You also hear him from time to time each month on Thy Strong Word as a regular guest. Pastor Lukomski, I'm sure that the many years of hosting Wrestling with the Basics and being a frequent guest on KFUO, you have a few stories to share of your time here and the people you've met and the blessings of being a part of this. What are some stories you'd like to share with us today?
Well, could I address the whole bigger picture of the ministry of KFUO as part of that? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because see, here's the thing that after working there these many years that I realized is when this whole thing was started, it was started because there was a bunch of people who said, we want to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out to people. We think the fact that God sent his son to die for the world. And that's how much he loves people. People need to know that. They took very serious that commandment to preach the gospel to all nations. Now, if you know us as Missouri Synod Lutherans, we're kind of backward. It's just how it is. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's our German heritage or what it is. And yet there was this person, our group of people that said, there's this new thing called radio. You won't believe you can have a box sitting in your house and you can hear the voice of someone who might be 10, 20 miles away. And they said, that sounds like a device for getting the word of Jesus Christ out. And is it true, Andy? You're kind of the foundation guy there. We were the first Christian radio station west of the Mississippi. That's right, isn't it?
We weren't necessarily the first, but we were the oldest continuously operating Christian station in the country.
Oh, okay. So thank you for clarifying that for me. So I will remember that if people ask. We're the oldest continuing Christian radio station. West of the Mississippi? West of the Mississippi. In the country? Not just west of the Mississippi?
As far as I know, based on the records that I've reviewed, it looks like we are the oldest continuously operating Christian station in the country.
All right. So you got these really conservative German Lutherans, and yet they say, hey, this technology, that this might change things. So let's do that. And so we did that. We did that for years, talking to people in St. Louis, and yes, like I said, farmers on tractors in Springfield. And then someone said, you know what? They've got these satellite dishes now. Wouldn't that be cool if we had a satellite dish? You guys remember the satellite dish? The great big gigantic dish?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the brainstorm. Now we've got the gigantic dish, and now who knows how far we'll go. Well, it turned out that satellite dishes really weren't going to have the impact that radio had, but we did it, and we had it. And then we teamed up with a radio station in McCook, Nebraska, because, well, this is another way. We can take our program, and they'll take it, and they'll expand it out, and because that's what we want to do. I don't care, St. Louis, McCook, we want people to know about Jesus and his love. And then, of course, God did something that no one could have predicted. Joanie, you and I, we're both older people. Could you have ever dreamt of the internet, what we have today?
Never. When I think about, we had Jenny on last week, and when we were talking about how far we've come, the things that we used before and what happened now, and how we're all over the world is phenomenal. It really is.
So what we're doing right now is a perfect example of that. Back in the old days when we would do the morning Bible study and when we would do Wrestling with the Basics, I would have to drive from New Athens, Illinois, which was about an hour drive. And of course, darn it, you guys were right in the middle of not just outside of downtown St. Louis, which meant I would have to fight that traffic on Poplar Street Bridge every time I would come over. And there would be the occasions when I'd have to call on my cell phone and say, well, I'm going to be a little bit late. But yeah, it required me to drive over there we record probably 2 or 3 hours because we were in studio, and that's how it had to be done. Well, now I'm up here in Northville, Minnesota. You guys are sitting there in the air-conditioned studios in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank God for the air conditioning, huh? And we can do this. In fact, the Bible study that I participate, Thy Strong Word, the host isn't even in St. Louis anymore. He's up here in Minnesota. Pastor Boo is just the finest gentleman, too. So it's all different. It's all changed, and it's all good. I had a gal from Japan. I still have no idea how a gal in Japan was listening to KFUO Radio, but she was. And she was the kindest gal, and she sent us this wonderful email and talked about how much she liked the show. And we actually exchanged books for a while. She had something that she thought was worth reading, and I'd send her something, which again is amazing that I could go on Amazon and send a book to somebody in Japan. And then there was the fellow who was in the service in Germany, and somehow he got hooked on KFUO too, and he would have contact. And of course, then there's all kinds of local people as well. But I'm just amazed. It is scary in a way because, man, we better be telling the truth because a lot of people are going to be hearing it. But isn't it remarkable that this little station that started off in this little tiny building on the St. Louis Seminary campus is now literally going out to the ends of the earth, and with some really pretty good stuff too. That's the remarkable thing, because that was the one thing, and I'll say that again. My experience at KFUO is it was always about Jesus. And you asked about stories. That was the great thing about Lynn pointed this out. My wife pointed this out because she would come over and she knew the people over there, and they were all people that loved Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, then how could you not have good stuff coming out when you got people who are all people who have faith in Christ? So anyway, you didn't expect a sermon, but I'm a pastor, so you should have expected it.
No, but it's very true what you're talking about. Hearing that gospel message around the world. I remember Dr. Andy Bartelt did a Bible study from the church I attend, and there was a missionary down in Brazil who was listening to the Bible study the same time we were doing it. And I know there are many listeners all around the world, and some of them probably had never heard the gospel before, who are able to hear it now. And not only hear it, but you get that same message day after day.
Yeah.
So that as the Holy Spirit works in their hearts, they're hearing that message constantly in all the programming on KFUO, and they always have.
Do you have some highlights from your time, however many years, since we don't exactly know when you started?
Yeah, whatever that was.
Whatever that was. Time before I can remember. Do you have highlights from the many years that you've served and all that?
You know, Sarah, you'd think after 35 years you would.
All right, next question.
But not
Yes,
that I can think of.
KFUO whenever you came, that was your highlight. That was your highlight of the week, right?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's all so good. I don't know how you could pick out any.
I'm sorry, there's truly a cohesiveness there at the radio station. And what your wife said is true. Everyone there was working to share the message of Jesus Christ. Yes, it was a job, but we all knew why we were doing it, and that does make a difference.
So let's take it from a different angle, because we were talking about the great benefits that have come because of the technology. But Joanie, I think that is the one thing that makes me sad, because so every other week I would come over there and we'd do the live show, and then Matt and I would record a couple episodes, or Paul and I would record a couple episodes. And you know what? I don't get to see you guys anymore.
Yeah.
And I miss that. Because you're right. That's the finest group of people. And when I do get over there once a year now for Share-a-thon, it's the same great people. You've gone on, you've retired too, Joanie. It's so good to see and hear from you again. But Sarah's there. She's a sweetheart. Well, yeah, I won't say anything about Andy. Is he listening?
No.
No. Again, so isn't that amazing too?
Right.
Because we had these great people like Chuck and Don Matzett and Paul. And of course, everybody moves on. We just do it. That's how it happens.
Right.
That's the great thing about the life eternal and the resurrection of the dead. Because here's everything's temporary and passing. The people that I love the most, what makes it hard is knowing I'm not going to get to keep them here. But I will in the future. That'll all work out. That'll be okay. But that's been the thing. You're right. Then they've been replaced by these other really, really great people that are there. And I really need to have a shout out for Gary Duncan. Don't you just love Gary?
Oh, yes.
And see, he's been there. And in fact, we all came in about the same time.
Right.
I came in and Chuck came in, and Chuck, of course, brought in Gary and brought in Paul. And see, I love Gary because then Gary was doing this thing where he was having these little devotions. It's like we went full circle.
Yes.
I started off doing the little devotions at noon, and then Gary was for a while doing this program where he had little devotions at noon, and he invited me to come and do those once a week too. And we got to do the old characters again. We got to do Peter and Amos the shepherd. But yeah, it just, I don't know. My life would be totally different if it wasn't for KFUO. And I certainly hope and pray that the opportunity we had to share with people about this Jesus who just has so many kind and good things to say. I just rejoice in these stories where Jesus looks at people and he says, man, they're sheep without a shepherd. I guess I better stick around here and help them. Even though I know in his flesh he was saying, I'm tired. I need to take a break. but to know that we got that same kind of God and Lord who's looking over us today, that's been a great thing. So I've enjoyed doing that, and I know someday I'll be done with this too. I'm 71 years old now. I'm hoping to go to 95.
We would appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'll still be doing KFUO.
I do have a question before we have about a minute left here to wrap up. I do have a question about that vicar. I was just wondering, did you ever submit grades for that vicarage, or is that still on hold while he's... Is that how you get him to continue to co-host with you?
That's right.
You haven't submitted his grade for vicarage?
If he doesn't keep doing right. And thank you. We really do need to say hi to Matt Clark, because he has been just such a blessing to me and to the show and to KFUO as well. And by the way, I hope you all know he will soon be Dr. Matt Clark.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to have to start addressing him as Dr. Clark. But we'll let you know when that happens.
You did submit the grade for that vicarage.
Oh, yeah. He passed that. He passed that. He's moved on. Yeah.
Our guest today, Pastor Jolly John Lukomski, host of Wrestling with the Basics here on KFUO. Thanks so much for sharing these stories with
me. Thank you.
You can learn more about our history at kfuo.org/100. You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
And I'm Joanie Harwell.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.